Hello, everyone. Hope your Wednesday is going well. We've got a really unusual Wednesday in the fact that we're going to do homework and that's it. I'm going to get through it and just going to call it good. I do have one quick announcement that I want to share. So if you go onto Brightspace and go onto the signups for presentation dates, if you've already signed up or whether you haven't already signed up, you've been assigned a presentation date. So those of you signed up for Monday, Wednesday, even those of you signed up automatically for Friday are already in there. For those of you who did not sign up yet, you have a presentation date on Friday because Monday and Wednesday were already filled. And so by default, anyone who's got waited to sign up was going to be put on the presentation day was left, which ended up being Friday. So yeah, wanted you to be aware of that. So now we have presentation dates, we have topics. All we have to do is cover a deliverable for next week and then the presentations in the final week. Real quick on the presentations, so a little bit of advice. First of all, as you're preparing for the presentations, I would recommend two things. First of all, go back to the instructions for the presentations, which is going to be very specific. I've got some very specific details. In other courses you've done presentations for, it's usually multiple slides and you're going to be speaking for 5-10 minutes. This is a much shorter presentation with one slide, and I've already referred to that. That being said, I do think that there's certain content or certain approaches that you should take in your presentations. So I would also make sure that you review the oral presentation rubric, and I believe I provided some guidelines as well. Those are guidelines I wrote up for group presentations, but they're still applicable to some degree for individual presentations. You might want to review those. Actually, I shouldn't say might. You absolutely want to review those because those are kind of show my interpretation of the rubric and how you should actually approach your presentations. So keep that in mind as you're going forward. Again, it's not meant to be a stressful presentation, but it is a presentation you should put sufficient work into. That's something I reflected on Monday, and I hold to that, and I'll continue saying that as we move forward. All right, so let's do homework and let's skedaddle, shall we? Ben goes to his bank to wire transfer $1,000 to his sister Jennifer. The role of the bank in this transaction is best described as what? So this is that third party that we talked about, which was kind of the origin of the blockchain system. I like to use the term intermediary, but the book uses a different term. What was that term? Middleman. Yeah, middleman. So that's something, if you hear me say it, I'll probably use both terms if I use it on the exam. But intermediary or middleman is kind of what we're talking about. Remember, the idea of a blockchain was to eliminate the intermediary so that you only have a two-party transaction. All right, moving on to question number 5. A selected set of organizations may run a blockchain node separately for keeping transaction records. Administrators within the organization establish access rights and permissions for each participant. This type of blockchain is often called what? So this important way to answer this question is to note, first of all, it is a permission to blockchain, which has got a very specific set of categories. And also that it uses the term a selected set of organization or a group of organizations. So it's not a public blockchain because public blockchain has a permissionless process. It's not a permissionless blockchain for that same reason. And then it's not a private blockchain because it's private blockchain is specifically a single organization, a single central authority. So it has to be by default a consortium blockchain, which is a group of organizations that are running the blockchain. All right, one of my least favorite categories of questions. Which of the following statements is false? It's not a great test question, but it's good for learning, okay? So let's just go through these answers and see if they're true or false. A distributed ledger contains many copies of the same ledger. Is that a true statement or a false statement? It's one of the above, right? True, it is a true statement, so it can't be our answer. Distributed ledger stores the same set of transaction records. Is that a true statement or a false statement? That is also true. Let's go to D for no good reason. A transaction record cannot be added to the blockchain unless there's network consensus. Yes, that consensus step, that's the important one. That's the mining process that we talked about, and we're talking about proof of work. So actually adding consensus at the end of everything, that's a really important step. That's true. So we have C, which presumably is a false statement. Because a distributed ledger exists in a blockchain network, a computer consisting of all transaction records may crash and cause a seeking issue in the blockchain network. No, that's actually the whole goal of having a distributed ledger. If one computer system crashes, the rest of the network still maintains integrity, and the old computer that crashed will get updated when it comes back online. So C is an incorrect answer. Question number 9. When we refer to smart contract in blockchain, we mean, so is it an actual contract? Is this something that Professor Templeton would be able to speak knowledgeably about? It's a smart contract because Professor Templeton's talking about it. He's a smart guy. Yeah, he's a very smart guy. That is probably the nicest thing I've ever said about Scotty T. Probably the nicest thing. I actually have a very high opinion of Professor Templeton, but this is not about his contracts. This is not about the things that he talks about in his class. Remember, a smart contract is a piece of software code that can be executed or triggered by business activities, which is D. That's our answer there. So it's like when you go through a business activity on Amazon to go buy something that basically triggers the activity, triggers the transaction. That's an example of a smart contract in a very simplified form. All right, question number 13. Which of the following is not true with respect to artificial intelligence? So we're going to go ahead and go through our answers again one at a time. Okay, which of the following is not true? So AI is a broad field in computer science. Is that a true statement? That is a true statement. Okay, AI is intelligence exhibited by machines rather than humans. That is also a true statement. Going to D again for no good reason. AI are also called technology, or is also called cognitive technologies. It's like, Dr. Barnes, I don't remember anything about that. You obviously weren't paying attention to my lecture. You were just listening to every single word I said. That's fair. You kind of, it's very easy to lose focus on my presentations. We are in a very warm room and we are talking about boring stuff like AIS. But one of the things I did talk about on Monday is that it was also called cognitive technologies. Remember I said it might come up in the homework? Yep. That's where it is. It's probably the only time you'll ever talk about it. But yeah, D is also an answer. AI began in the 1990s. Is that a true statement? This is one that we didn't talk about, but you probably could have done some research. Did anybody do any research on this? When did AI begin? So what did you find out?
Was 1956.
That is exactly right. That's when the term AI was first coined and they started doing development of the research in AI. 1956. Believe it or not, that was before I was born. Yeah, it was before I was born. So yeah, it's been around for a very long time, very long time. So AI did not begin in the 1990s. It is C. Which of the following best describes the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning? Okay, so what do we think? So we had those ovals, and what is the oval in the very center? The one that's kind of the smallest subset. What was that called? That's deep learning. Okay, that's deep learning. Then the deep learning is contained within a smaller or larger subset, which is called machine learning. Not getting a lot of responsiveness here. Maybe I don't know. What do I do? Do I throw cans of Red Bull out to everybody to try to wake them up? That would probably be a disaster. That would create a lot of chaos. Okay. All right. So machine learning. Then we've got the overall, the largest oval that everything's contained in. That's artificial intelligence. Okay. So what does that mean? It means machine learning is a subset of AI. Does that sound intuitively sensible to everybody? The way I described it, I didn't actually show the ovals, but can you visualize the ovals in your head? Yes. Okay. So we can actually talk about this smaller. Actually, I think in the slides, I showed them as squares, but you can make that transition to yourself. You can actually transition the squares to ovals. Which of the following best describes machine learning? All right, so let's just go through the answers. What do you say? Okay, which best describes machine learning? Machine learning is driven by programming instructions. Is that a true statement? So programming instructions would imply that if you have a particular input that you're going to get a specific output. Does machine learning give you the same output every single time? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So that can't be true. Machine learning is a different branch of computer science from AI. Well, we just talked about how machine learning is a subset of AI, which means that they are related. So it's not different. It's going to be a related branch with respect to AI. Machine learning is a technique where software model is trained using data. What do you guys think about that statement? I like that one. Let's go ahead and put a pin in that one and look at D. Machine learning is the ability of a machine to think on its own. Does machine learning just evolve? It's just fully formed right out and just say, okay, I can do everything on my own. No, we actually talked about the different stages of machine learning, and we have to start out with a very, very basic stage where we say supervised learning, then unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, and then moving into reinforcement learning. So it actually has an evolution process. So D is not correct. So C is our correct answer. Just kind of seems like we got none of these just tacked on as a afterthought. You could have just removed those and they would have been the same thing. Does anybody get really frustrated when they see the answer none of these? That's like the authors are just really, really trying to frustrate people. That's my impression about those. By the way, there will never be a none of these on any of my exams. You have my guarantee on that. Have my guarantee on that. Question number 19 or 18, sorry, 18. Which of the following best describes deep learning? So how do we characterize deep learning? It emulates what? Emulates the human brain. Okay, so we talked about this. We talked about you writing the essay and then writing the essay again and looking different because you follow different pathways to get to the same conclusion depending on what time of day or how you're thinking about a problem. So it's going to be representative of the human brain. So human brain is kind of neural pathways that are developed. So they develop a set of neural pathways that are very similar to that, which is neural networks. So if we're looking for that term, Deep learning involves complex multi-layered neural networks. That's what deep learning is trying to describe right there. So there we go. All right, question 19. I'm going to throw it out here and say I do not like this question. I probably should eliminate this question just because I don't like it. Technically speaking, I think two of the questions could be considered correct answers to this one, but we're going to talk a little bit about this. So, which of the following is not directly related to one of the 5 questions of machine learning and AI is best suited to answer? So, the best approach to this would be go to that table that I provided to you from the slides and go through and see if you can identify based on that table. But I wouldn't expect you to know that table for the exam. I would expect you to know 2 things very specifically. We're talking about machine learning and AI, how they answer questions. Remember, they're designed to answer 2 types of questions: classification and regression. Classification is trying to put things into one of 2 categories, and the regression is trying to assign a numeric value for something. So if we look at A says which business strategy would be most successful. And the argument for that is that if there's multiple business strategies, that's not a true classification task. So this is probably our answer. In fact, this is what the book gives as the answer. Now, we're going to have a problem with that here in just a second. We'll see why. Is the firm a good merger candidate? This is an easy classification task. This is a yes or no question, which we have two possible answers. It's easy classification. So B, we can say is directly related. A is the answer to the question, by the way, but I want to look at C. Which type of customer would like the new product? The way the book describes this is basically a clustering chore, which assumes that there's multiple categories. The problem is this is multi-level classification, which kind of violates our assumption that we're using 1 or 2 categories. Now, could we back into this and say we could actually use a single level classification task for every single classification? The answer is yes, but that's really a big stretch right there. That's one of those things that we look at and we say, yeah, this is just basically the same as A. So if you looked at C and say this could also be a wrong answer, you're right. I don't like C as a good answer either, but this is the way the book explained this question. So if you answered A or C, I would have accepted either of those as correct answers. Now D is a perfect example of a regression strategy. Okay, a regression tool. So B and D are very obviously directly related, whereas A and C they're both not nearly as clear cut. So A is the answer the book gives, but I would accept A or C in this one. And of course, E is not a correct answer because none of these is never a correct answer, at least not in my book. All right, the next few questions. Hopefully you learned from these questions. These are questions that you should probably be very clear about how they're going to affect the exam. I will tell you right now, it's unlikely I will ask a question this straightforward. I'm not going to say what is supervised learning, what is unsupervised learning, but I expect you to know all these categories and be able to expect you to understand practical examples of them, okay? So let's just go ahead and remind ourselves of these 4 different types of machine learning, okay? So first of all, we have a supervised learning. A supervised learning says we know what the input is. We also know what the output should be. So we test the machine learning tool by looking at what the output generated. And if it matches our output, we're happy with the machine learning tool's development. If it does not match the output, we still have training to do. So that's the preliminary training task. Then we have other training tasks that go beyond that. We have unsupervised learning, which is where we know what the input is, but we do not know what the output. This is where we have some confidence in the machine learning tool to develop on its own. Then we have semi-supervised learning, which basically says we have a set of inputs, but the inputs are not necessarily correctly labeled. So the labels are missing, and the machine learning tool has to be able to determine based on the context of the information what the label should be. And then finally, we have the most evolved, which is reinforcement learning. This is trial and error. This is basically how they've been trained. It's been trained on a data set. It still has some rough edges that we need to hone out. So we can put it out there and we get feedback on it. This would be early versions of like ChatGPT. ChatGPT 3.5 and even 4.0 would be very good examples of reinforcement learning tools. They have a lot of data they're already trained on, but they still don't know how to analyze that data perfectly. So they were going to go through trial and error techniques. All right, so with that, which of the following best describes supervised learning? Remember, supervised learning is both input and output. So we have C, the training data contains input-output pairs. Which of the following best describes unsupervised learning? We only have outputs in that particular situation. So, or we don't have inputs, excuse me. Only have inputs, we don't have outputs. So the training data only includes input values for 21, all right? Which of the following best describes semi-supervised learning? Okay, semi-supervised learning is that, oops, I'm getting lost here. So the training data contains missing labels or incomplete data. So yeah, need to make sure that we have that listed. And then finally, which of the following best describes reinforcement learning? Reinforcement learning, 3 words: trial and error. Basically, It puts out response and gets feedback on whether the response is correct and updates this information based on that feedback. Okay. So that's how we think about trial and error. Reinforcement learning is the trial and error process. All right, almost done. Let's talk about 4. So what are the 3 types of blockchain? Did everybody identify the 3 types of blockchain? How many are there's 4? 4. Yeah, 4 types of blockchain. Remember, we learned 4 types of blockchain. So the book refers to 3 types. They said public, private, and consortium. The 4th one is hybrid. Yes, hybrid. So let's go ahead and define each of these, okay? So we've already talked about public blockchain having no access restrictions. It's a permissionless process which anybody can access, okay? That's how you should characterize public blockchain as very distinct from the others, okay? The private blockchain has a permissioned process and it's usually authorized by a single central authority. Okay, so a single central authority has control over the permission process. This would be one organization has a blockchain which external participants can participate, or usually internal participants are going to be participating on. So we talked about the consortium blockchain. The consortium blockchain is similar to private and there's a permissioned process. However, the permission process is controlled by multiple organizations. Multiple organizations can control. This is usually when we're talking about transactions that occur across multiple organizations within a group. These group of organizations can do transactions amongst one another, and they all have copies of a ledger on the blockchain. And then we've got our new one, the one that the book doesn't talk about, the one that you are still responsible for the exam. That is the hybrid blockchain. The hybrid blockchain is basically a combination of a public and a private blockchain. It basically is controlled by a single central authority, but it does involve some sort of permissionless process. So if you're confused about hybrid, you should think it is like a private blockchain in that it has a single central authority, but the people can get on the blockchain through a permissionless process. So that's why it's similar to public. So that's the key to understanding the hybrid blockchain. Or hybrid blockchain is basically saying, what are the elements that are similar to the private and what are the similar elements that are similar to public? Last question. This is kind of a conceptual question. So recently, more than 20% of companies surveyed they were testing or considering artificial intelligence applications in their business. Now it says recently. I think this is a little bit outdated. I think this survey that they were talking about was actually done probably in 2020 or 2021. So that's recent if you talk about all of human history, but not recent with respect to the scope and scale of artificial intelligence. I'm assuming most organizations have increased beyond that, but only 4% were using actively using AI. I do know that that's incorrect, though. We're well beyond that. So it's interesting question. We had 2 parts. A, why are companies interested in AI? So this is an important point to note is that if we talk about the potential of AI, it has a great deal of potential to offer value to organizations. So if we think that AI can actually generate value, can actually reduce cost or generate additional revenues, that's a really important point. It does not even need to be restricted to quantitative value. We could talk about qualitative value. If we say that a process that took 2 hours beforehand now takes 20 minutes, that would be an active improvement in AI as well. That's not necessarily a direct qualitative or quantitative cost, but it's something that we could actually use as an opportunity cost because those costs could be, or that those resources could be used in other places. Now, this is an important point. Those of you who attended the TrueBiz forum a few weeks ago, they were talking about AI. Do we think organizations are very, very effective in their use of AI tools for generation of value? I'm going to wait for feedback on this one. I got plenty of time, so I'm waiting on you all for this one. What do you think?
Somewhere else, he was a little more skeptical about it, while the other 2 were really.
So I think the individual you're referring to gave a statistic and said that a certain percentage of organizations, they have a certain, it's not a certain percentage of AI activities were not value generating, which is why there's kind of an impediment right now. So what was the percentage of AI activities that were being proposed but are not value generating? Does anybody remember that statistic? It was like 80%. 80% of AI activities that are being proposed are not value generating. So is that a problem? If you're talking about the potential of AI, but only 1 out of 5 AI proposals is going to actually improve processes in the organization or improve value in the organization, that's an issue right there, because we can't just basically say, well, it doesn't matter if we actually generate any value. We're incurring these costs, but we're not generating any value associated with it. If you have an organization that incurs only costs and does not generate value, that's an organization that will not exist for a long period of time. What are some other impediments? So we're talking about B now. So what are some other impediments here? What is probably the biggest impediment for for AI being instituted in the workplace? Now you have to think beyond your own scope. You all are learning about AI. You're becoming more comfortable using it. But do you represent the generation of workers that's kind of commonplace to the workforce right now? Who are the people that are running the workforce right now? It's my generation, Generation X, and the generation after mine, the millennials. Okay. Would you all still be considered Generation Z, or are we Generation Z? Okay. I have a problem knowing the cutoff. I know that we're getting close to Generation Alpha, yeah, I think that's the case, but Gen Z. So you all are very easy adopters of a technology, and by that thought that you're going to be very good adopters of artificial intelligence. What about my generation? Do you think that we are going to be easy to adopt AI? I mean, I'm doing a fairly good job with it, but even mine is kind of a little bit stumbling, a little bit clumsy. Think about somebody who has basically never worked in technology, never done any AIS courses, does not have Excel skills. Basically, is the smartphone is the most difficult thing that they've ever dealt with. So how effectively are they going to be incorporating AI? They could go on ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, can you recommend a good place for dinner? All right. That may be a personal value tool, but it doesn't provide value to the organization. So what are we talking about when we talk about the current generation not being able to effectively adopt these technologies? Has this been true for other technologies previously? A lack of knowledge, more so much knowledge. They have knowledge about the area, but I was looking more for like the area of rhymes with kills. Skills, there we go. Lack of skills, okay? And it makes sense because they've always done things a certain way and it's always worked that way. It doesn't matter if the new ways are going to improve. This is a constant bombardment of a problem. We see that people who are set in their ways will not adapt. And this is a profound technological change, probably the biggest disruption we've ever seen in technology in all of human history. And the problem is we've got a current generations that are workforce that are saying, I don't want to adopt this because I'm comfortable with the way things are. And you don't have to go much further than looking here at Truman State. I would probably say that you probably have instructors in your other classes that say no use of AI tools whatsoever in any classes. Anybody have any situations like that where your instructors have said no AI tools? Yeah. I'm not going to try to criticize the individual instructors. I'm sure they have their reasons, but if we're talking about value relevance in the workforce, that is a short-sighted approach. So this is why we need to become better adopted. And it's going to be contingent on you all. It's going to be big on you all to make sure that you come into the workforce and you can say, this is a better approach. This is something that's going to generate more value for the organization. You should really think about it. All right. With that lecture, I'll get down off my pedestal and let you all have a rest of a good day.
I didn't think so against technology, they didn't have a bright space.